Do you remember those recipes that were in every cookbook until they vanished? They filled our tables with quick, familiar meals everyone knew by heart. How did we let them disappear so quietly? Tomato aspic salad was one of those wobbly, love-it-or-hate-it dishes that somehow landed in nearly every American cookbook from the 1940s through the 70s. It was savory, jiggly, and bright red, made from tomato juice and gelatin with vinegar and seasonings for a tangy bite. Some folks added chopped celery or olives, giving it that fancy look for garden parties or holiday buffets. Gelatin was not just for dessert back then, it was a whole category of cooking, and tomato aspic became part of the trend. It was often set in ring molds and served alongside deviled eggs, crackers, or cold cuts. Some loved its chilled, tangy taste on a hot day, others politely pushed it to the side. But like it or not, this salad was everywhere. Over time, changing tastes sent it packing, but its shiny red wobble still lingers in old recipe boxes and vintage cookbooks. Cabbage roll casserole was the shortcut version of stuffed cabbage rolls that showed up in kitchens all over America from the 1950s to the 70s. The original recipe, rolling cabbage leaves with meat and rice, was a labor of love. But not everyone had the time, so folks turned it into a casserole. You layered cabbage, beef, rice, and tomato sauce in a big baking dish and let the oven do the work. It had all the same hearty, filling ingredients, but was much easier to pull together on a busy weeknight. You would find it in church cookbooks, clipped from magazines, or passed down on handwritten recipe cards. It was especially popular with families needing to stretch ground beef or feed a crowd on a budget. Over time, the casserole faded from dinner tables, replaced by flashier meals. But for those who remember it, cabbage rolls still bring back warm memories. Salmon loaf with dill sauce was one of those humble, dependable dinners that helped families get by when money was tight. You mixed canned salmon with breadcrumbs and eggs, formed it into a loaf, and baked it until firm enough to slice. It was like meatloaf, but made with fish, and dressed up with a creamy dill sauce to feel a little fancier. From the 1940s through the 60s, canned salmon was cheap, packed with protein, and easy to keep on hand, making this loaf a favorite for home cooks. You would find the recipe scribbled in cookbooks or passed along on handwritten cards, especially in coastal towns or small communities. It was not the flashiest dinner, but it filled plates and stretched a single can of fish into a family meal. Over time, salmon loaf faded from tables, but for those who grew up with its flaky slices, it was pure practicality. Bologna salad spread was the no-frills sandwich filling that showed up in school lunches, church gatherings, and potluck tables from the 1940s to the 70s. You took leftover bologna, chopped it fine or ground it up, then mixed it with mayonnaise and sweet pickle relish. Some folks added chopped onions or hard-boiled eggs to give it extra flavor. It was quick, affordable, and filled sandwiches without much fuss, perfect for families needing to stretch deli meat farther. You would find the recipe in church cookbooks, PTA newsletters, or clipped from magazines. Bologna salad was mild, creamy, with a little tang from the relish, and it became a lunchbox standby. Over time, as fancier sandwich spreads and deli meats became common, this simple spread faded away. But for anyone who remembers spreading that pink, creamy mixture onto slices of bread, it was pure, practical comfort from a thriftier time. Porcupine meatballs were one of those quirky recipes that managed to stick around American kitchens from the 1940s through the 70s, and they got their name for a pretty clever reason. You would mix ground beef with uncooked rice, shape it into meatballs, and as they simmered in sauce or baked in the oven, the rice poked out like little spikes. It looked like a porcupine, but tasted like pure, hearty comfort food. The real trick was how this recipe stretched a small amount of beef into enough to feed a whole family, making it perfect for tight budgets or lean weeks. You could swap in tomato sauce, gravy, or broth depending on what you had lying around, and the rice plumped up, making every bite more filling. Community cookbooks, women's magazines, and old recipe cards printed versions of it everywhere. Over time, porcupine meatballs quietly vanished, replaced by trendier meals. But they were a thrifty, tasty reminder of simpler times. Hot dog hash was the budget dinner that showed up in nearly every community cookbook, family recipe box, and neighborhood potluck starting in the 1950s. You took hot dogs, diced them up, fried them with potatoes, onions, and any scraps you had left. And just like that, you had a crispy, salty, filling meal. It was one of those quick-fix recipes born from necessity, perfect for weeknights when the grocery budget ran tight, but everyone still needed a hot meal. Hot dogs were cheap, easy to store, and stretched a lot farther than other meats, which made them the go-to protein in countless homes. Some families added leftover vegetables, bell peppers, or even stirred in scrambled eggs to bulk it up. It could pass for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on how creative you got. As fast food and frozen dinners took over, hot dog hash quietly disappeared. But for those who remember frying it up, it was pure comfort food on a dime. Mock apple pie with Ritz crackers was one of those wild Depression-era recipes that stuck around American kitchens far longer than anyone expected. You crushed buttery crackers, added sugar, spices, and lemon juice, baked it under a flaky crust, and somehow it came out tasting just like apple pie. The recipe became a point of pride for frugal home cooks, turning pantry staples into something sweet when fruit was hard to come by. It showed up in nearly every community cookbook, church pamphlet, and wartime recipe collection from the 1930s through the 70s. You would bring it to potlucks, family suppers, or bake sales, and folks were always amazed at how crackers pulled off the trick. It was clever, cheap, and made do with what you had. But once apples became easy to find again, the pie slowly vanished from kitchen counters. Still, for those who remember slicing into it, mock apple pie proved creativity always sweetened the hardest times. Pineapple upside-down cake was one of those bright, cheerful desserts that felt like a celebration every time it hit the table, and for decades, it was everywhere. You would take canned pineapple rings, arrange them in a sugary glaze with maraschino cherries, pour cake batter over top, and flip the whole thing out of the pan once baked. The result? A glossy, caramelized masterpiece with golden pineapple on top. During the 1940s through the 60s, this cake was a fixture at church teas, family reunions, and potluck suppers across America. It showed up in nearly every spiral-bound cookbook and magazine recipe collection, promising a sweet treat with pantry staples. The canned pineapple boom made it affordable and easy, while the presentation always got a smile. But as fancier desserts and new trends took over, the pineapple upside-down cake quietly slipped off the dessert scene. You can still find it tucked away in vintage cookbooks or made by nostalgic home bakers, but it is no longer the centerpiece it once was. For those who remember the sticky, buttery sweetness of that golden topping, it is a bite of pure retro comfort that deserves a second look. Ham and potato scallop bake was one of those hearty, simple casseroles that could stretch a few ingredients into a meal big enough for the whole family, and nearly every old cookbook had a version. You layered sliced potatoes, bits of ham, maybe some onions or cheese, poured over a creamy sauce, and baked it until bubbly and golden. It was the ultimate weeknight dinner for families trying to make do, especially in small towns and farm communities across the Midwest. During the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, scalloped potato dishes were everywhere, but adding ham turned it into a one-dish dinner that stuck to your ribs. You could swap in leftover ham from Sunday supper, use canned meat, or stretch a small amount of protein a long way. Community cookbooks printed variations on the recipe, always with a note about how affordable and filling it was. But over time, as fast food, frozen dinners, and flashier meals took over, this bake faded from the spotlight. Still, for those who remember scraping the crispy edges out of the casserole dish, ham and potato scallop bake was the kind of no-fuss, satisfying dinner that brought comfort to countless American tables. Seafoam salad was part sweet, part savory, and entirely retro, the kind of dish that once ruled potlucks, picnics, and church basement buffets, but now barely makes an appearance. It got its name from the pale green color, thanks to lime gelatin mixed with cottage cheese, whipped topping, and canned fruit like pineapple or pears. The texture was fluffy, light, and oddly refreshing, with just enough sweetness to count as dessert, but enough tang to land it on the dinner table. Seafoam salad popped up in nearly every mid-century community cookbook, especially during the gelatin salad craze of the 1950s and 60s. It was a budget-friendly way to bring something colorful and crowd-pleasing to a gathering, using ingredients that kept well in the fridge and cost next to nothing. For some families, no holiday meal was complete without a wobbly green mold of seafoam salad sitting proudly next to the ham or turkey. But tastes changed, and the once beloved lime salad quietly vanished from most kitchens, replaced by trendier sides and fancier desserts. Still, for those who remember scooping out its creamy, jiggly layers, seafoam salad brings back a nostalgic bite of mid-century charm. Creamed chipped ham on toast, or as some called it, SOS, was one of those recipes that kept American families afloat during lean times when the pantry looked bare. The ingredients were simple, and that was the beauty of it. You would take chipped ham, those thin, salty deli slices, and stir them into a creamy, buttery white sauce until everything came together in one warm, filling mixture. Then you spooned it over toasted bread, and dinner was done. It may not have been fancy, but when meat was expensive or rationed, this dish was a small lifesaver. It originally gained popularity in military mess halls, where it filled soldiers' plates quickly and cheaply before making its way into civilian kitchens. It was everywhere from the 1940s to the 60s, printed in homemaker guides, passed down on recipe cards, and scribbled into church cookbooks. You could jazz it up with pepper or herbs, or swap the toast for biscuits if you were lucky enough to have them. But as groceries became more plentiful, SOS faded from the spotlight. Still, for those who remember that creamy, salty bite, it is pure nostalgia served on a plate. Cold Bologna and cheese roll-ups were the ultimate quick lunch that required no oven, no stove, and barely any time at all. For decades, they were tucked into school lunchboxes, packed into picnic baskets, or thrown together for a roadside snack when families were on the go. You would spread a little mayonnaise on a slice of Bologna, lay down a piece of American cheese, roll it up, and you were done. No bread required, just salty, creamy, and surprisingly filling. These simple roll-ups became a staple during the 1950s through the 70s, thanks to how affordable and easy they were to make. They popped up in community cookbooks, magazine clippings, and even on retro party trays at neighborhood get-togethers. Parents loved them because they could stretch lunch meat into something satisfying without spending extra. Some folks added a toothpick to hold them together, but most just grabbed one and popped it straight in their mouths. As lunch trends evolved, these humble roll-ups quietly disappeared. But for those who remember that tangy, creamy bite, it was proof that even the simplest food could do the job right. Egg and olive sandwiches were the tangy, salty, old-school lunch that filled lunch bags, recipe boxes, and potluck tables across America for decades. You would start with basic egg salad, hard-boiled eggs chopped up with mayonnaise, and stir in green olives, giving it a briny bite that set it apart from other sandwiches. It was quick, affordable, and surprisingly filling, especially when groceries had to stretch. From the 1940s through the 70s, this sandwich popped up in nearly every community cookbook, sandwiched between deviled eggs and pimento cheese spreads. Some folks added a little celery for crunch, others stuck to the basics: soft white bread, creamy filling, and plenty of olives. It made an appearance at church luncheons, family gatherings, and brown bag lunches, especially in the South and Midwest, where budget-friendly meals ruled the day. As sandwich trends evolved and deli counters expanded, egg and olive sandwiches slowly disappeared from everyday life. But for those who remember biting into that creamy, salty filling, it is more than just lunch. It is a little bite of practicality from a time when simple recipes got families through the week. Ham mousse mold was the fancy-looking, jiggly party dish that promised elegance without breaking the bank. You would puree ham, blend it with cream, gelatin, and savory seasonings, then chill the whole thing in a decorative mold until firm. It slid out glossy and pink, ready for crackers, celery sticks, or curious guests at your next gathering. During the 1940s through the 70s, molded salads and savory spreads were all the rage, and mousse mold fit right in. It was the star of bridal showers, holiday buffets, and fancy luncheons, popping up in women's magazines, community cookbooks, and recipe swaps. Sure, it might sound strange today, but back then, it was a sign you were hosting with flair. The ingredients were simple, but the presentation made it feel special. Over time, as party food became simpler and gelatin salads fell out of fashion, ham mousse quietly vanished from tables. But for those who remember carefully unmolding that wobbly pink creation onto a platter, it is a quirky reminder of how people stretched their resources and their creativity to make even the humblest meal feel like an occasion. Macaroni and stewed tomatoes was a Depression-era dinner that became a weeknight standby in homes all across America, especially during the 1930s through the 60s. The recipe was about as basic as it gets. You boiled up elbow macaroni, opened a can of stewed tomatoes, added butter, salt, and pepper, and tossed it all together. That was dinner. It sounds simple, but back then, when grocery shelves were sparse and paychecks stretched thin, meals like this kept families going. You could find the recipe scribbled on the back of old church cookbooks or tucked between the pages of a family recipe box. Some added cheese or leftover vegetables if they had them, but the base stayed the same. Macaroni and stewed tomatoes filled countless plates when meat was hard to come by, offering warm, buttery comfort without much cost. As new pasta dishes and convenience foods took over, it quietly disappeared. But for those who remember stirring that pot on the stove, this humble, tangy meal is a reminder of simpler times and how the most basic ingredients could still bring everyone to the table. Peanut butter bread without eggs or milk was one of those clever, budget-friendly recipes that made its way into homes during the Great Depression and stuck around during wartime rationing when ingredients were scarce. With items like eggs, butter, and milk in short supply, home cooks had to get creative, and this simple, quick bread fit the bill. You would mix flour, baking powder, sugar, and peanut butter, sometimes with a splash of water or shortening, and bake it until golden and firm. The result? A dense, slightly sweet loaf with a rich peanut flavor that could stretch meals without fancy ingredients. It was perfect for breakfast, school lunches, or an afternoon snack when grocery shelves were bare. You would find recipes for peanut butter bread tucked into wartime pamphlets, clipped from newspapers, or passed down on faded recipe cards. It's sliced up perfectly for toast or sandwiches, offering comfort even in tough times. As rationing ended and grocery stores filled back up, this little loaf quietly faded away. But for those who remember that nutty, hearty slice fresh from the oven, it is proof that even the toughest years still left room for something sweet. Creamed peas on toast was one of those no-frills, practical meals that filled American kitchens from the 1930s through the 60s, and it made its way into just about every community cookbook along the way. You would whip up a simple white sauce with butter, flour, and milk, stir in canned or frozen peas, and spoon the creamy mixture over toast. That was it. Fast, filling, and built for tight grocery budgets. During the Depression and World War II rationing, meals like this became a daily staple, especially in small towns, farming communities, and city apartments where stretching every dollar mattered. You would spot the recipe tucked beside chipped beef on toast in old recipe books, often labeled "good for lean weeks" or "quick supper." Some added onions, herbs, or shredded cheese, but the essentials stayed the same. Over the years, as frozen dinners and convenience foods took over, creamed peas on toast slipped quietly off the menu. But for anyone who remembers that warm, creamy bite with buttered toast underneath, it is a comforting flashback to when simple, filling food helped families make it through. Prune whip dessert was the surprisingly light, sweet treat that found its way onto countless American tables from the 1930s through the 50s, before it quietly vanished with changing tastes. It sounds odd now, but this airy dessert made use of simple, shelf-stable ingredients and packed a nutritional punch when families needed it most. You would stew prunes until soft, whip the fruit into a puree, fold in beaten egg whites, and chill the whole mixture until fluffy and firm. It was light, slightly tangy, and easy to make when ingredients were limited. Recipes for prune whip popped up everywhere, church cookbooks, health magazines, and wartime pamphlets offering a sweet treat that stretched the pantry and kept families going strong. Some folks added a sprinkle of sugar or lemon zest, but even plain, it was a comforting, budget-friendly dessert. Over time, richer sweets and modern snacks replaced it, and prune whip quietly disappeared. But for those who remember spooning into that airy, delicate dish, it is a nostalgic reminder that even in tough times, families found ways to treat themselves without wasting a single bite. American chopped suey, or as some folks called it, goulash, was the no-fuss, one-pan dinner that landed in nearly every American kitchen from the 1940s through the 70s. It was the kind of meal that made use of whatever was lying around: elbow macaroni, ground beef, canned tomatoes, onions, and a few seasonings to pull it all together. You tossed it in one pot, simmered everything until saucy and tender, and dinner was ready. It was hearty, simple, and easy to stretch when groceries were tight, which made it perfect for busy families or folks on a budget. Community cookbooks, church newsletters, and even food magazines printed endless versions of it, promising a filling dinner with pantry staples. Over time, as pasta trends got fancier and takeout became more common, humble chop suey quietly slipped away. But for those who remember scooping it onto plates, it was pure weeknight comfort. Banana mayonnaise sandwiches might sound strange today, but this southern lunchbox staple showed up everywhere during the 1940s through the 60s. It was exactly what it sounds like. You sliced up a ripe banana, spread mayonnaise on soft sandwich bread, and pressed it all together. No frills, no fancy tricks, just sweet, creamy, and surprisingly filling. During the Depression and wartime rationing, bananas were cheap, mayo was a pantry must, and bread stretched meals farther than you might think. Families packed these sandwiches for school lunches, picnics, and quick breakfasts when groceries ran lean. Some folks sprinkled sugar on top or added a little peanut butter, but the basics stayed the same: soft bread, creamy mayo, sweet banana slices. It popped up in countless regional cookbooks and old recipe cards, quietly becoming a quirky comfort food for families across the South. Over time, it faded from most tables, but it still sparks memories. Mock fish fillets made from mashed potatoes were a clever Depression-era recipe that stretched simple ingredients as far as they could go. You mashed up leftover potatoes, mixed in breadcrumbs, herbs, maybe a little onion, and shaped the mixture into patties. Fry them up, and suddenly you had something crispy and golden that almost passed for fish. It sounds strange today, but back when meat was scarce, these little patties were a lifesaver. You would find the recipe tucked into community cookbooks, handwritten on index cards, or clipped from newspapers. Families often served them with tartar sauce, lemon, or whatever condiments they could get their hands on. In coastal towns where real seafood was expensive, these mock fish fillets became even more popular. Over time, as grocery store options expanded, this thrifty meal faded from the table. But for those who remember, it is a reminder of making do and still eating well. Frosted sandwich loaf was the quirky retro party centerpiece that looked like dessert, but was really lunch in disguise. You would stack soft bread slices with layers of sandwich fillings like ham salad, pimento cheese, or egg salad. Then came the frosting, a thick coating of whipped cream cheese spread all over the outside. Sometimes folks decorated it with olives, parsley, or little radish roses to make it look extra fancy. From the 1940s through the 60s, these sandwich loaves showed up at bridal showers, church teas, and family luncheons. You would spot the recipe in glossy magazines, homemaker guides, or scribbled in community cookbooks. It stretched ingredients, looked impressive, and was surprisingly easy to make when money was tight. But over time, party foods changed, and simpler snacks like chips and dip replaced these layered loaves. Still, for anyone who remembers slicing into those creamy, savory layers, it was pure retro charm. Molasses baked beans with salt pork were once the pride of slow-cooked, hearty American comfort food. You would soak navy beans overnight, then bake them low and slow with molasses, brown sugar, and chunks of salt pork. The result? a pot of sticky, savory beans that filled the house with their sweet aroma. These beans were a staple at 4th of July barbecues, church picnics, and family dinners from the 1930s through the 60s. The molasses gave them their deep, rich flavor, while the salt pork added a little smoky bite. You could find the recipe scribbled on old recipe cards, tucked in church cookbooks, or passed down through generations. They simmered for hours, but they were worth the wait. Over time, as canned beans and quick meals took over, these old-fashioned baked beans quietly disappeared from the table. But their memory still lingers for those who grew up stirring the pot. Baked custard with nutmeg was the dessert that turned basic ingredients into something soft, silky, and comforting. You would whisk together milk, eggs, sugar, and vanilla, pour it into a baking dish, and cook it gently in the oven until set. A sprinkle of nutmeg on top added warmth and spice. This creamy, simple dessert filled dinner tables across America from the 1940s through the 60s. It was affordable, easy to make, and a guaranteed family favorite, especially after Sunday suppers. You would find recipes for baked custard tucked in community cookbooks, clipped from women's magazines, or handwritten in family recipe boxes. Some folks baked it in individual ramekins, others in one big dish scooped out by the spoonful. Over time, boxed pudding mixes and ready-made treats replaced this old-fashioned dessert. But for those who remember pulling that jiggly golden custard from the oven, it is a sweet reminder of home. Graham cracker icebox cake was the cool, creamy dessert that saved families from firing up the oven on hot days. You would layer graham crackers with whipped cream or pudding, then chill the whole thing overnight until it softened into one sliceable treat. It was simple, affordable, and found in nearly every cookbook from the 1940s through the 70s. Some versions used fruit, chocolate pudding, or marshmallows, but the basics stayed the same: sweet layers, chilled to perfection. It became a go-to dessert for birthdays, church suppers, and summer barbecues when nobody wanted to bake. You could spot this recipe clipped from food magazines or scribbled on old index cards. Over time, modern freezers and fancy desserts took over, and the humble icebox cake quietly slipped off most dinner tables. But for anyone who remembers slicing into those creamy layers, it is proof that dessert never had to be complicated. Rice ring salad was one of those showy, molded dishes that looked impressive but used simple ingredients. You would mix cooked rice with mayonnaise, peas, pimentos, and maybe some celery or olives, then press it into a ring mold and chill it. Once set, it turned out onto a platter with salad or tuna in the center. From the 1950s through the 60s, this colorful, practical salad showed up at potlucks, summer luncheons, and church picnics. It was affordable, easy to prep ahead, and held its shape even in the summer heat. You would spot recipes for rice ring salad in community cookbooks, women's magazines, and homemaker guides, all promising a fancy side dish with pantry staples. But as molded salads fell out of fashion, so did the rice ring. Still, for those who remember scooping out creamy bites at family gatherings, it is a quirky piece of retro Americana. Potato chip chicken casserole was the crispy, salty dinner that turned a plain chicken bake into something fun and filling. You would mix cooked chicken with condensed soup, maybe a few veggies, then top the whole thing with crushed potato chips before baking. The chips crisped up in the oven, adding a crunchy finish everyone loved. From the 1950s through the 70s, this quirky casserole popped up in community cookbooks, women's magazines, and family recipe boxes. It stretched leftovers, filled hungry bellies, and made dinner feel a little indulgent without much cost. It became a favorite for potlucks and quick weeknight meals, especially when groceries were tight. Over time, newer casserole recipes and ready-made meals took over, and this salty, crunchy dish slowly disappeared from the table. But for anyone who remembers scooping into that crispy, creamy bake, it is a reminder of how simple food brought families together. Cottage cheese and pineapple salad was the bright, creamy health food that filled lunch tables, picnics, and potlucks from the 1950s through the 70s. You would scoop cottage cheese onto lettuce, top it with pineapple slices or chunks, maybe add a cherry, and call it lunch. It was praised as low-calorie, high-protein, and perfect for dieting without feeling deprived. You would spot this salad in women's magazines, community cookbooks, and retro diner menus, promising a sweet, tangy bite with simple ingredients. It became especially popular during the salad craze when molded dishes and fruit salads were all the rage. Some swapped pineapple for peaches or pears, but the basics stayed the same: creamy, sweet, and easy on the wallet. As new diet trends came along, this simple salad quietly vanished. But for anyone who remembers those sweet, creamy bites, it is a quirky little piece of how America once ate light. Corn fritters with syrup were the golden, crispy bites that landed somewhere between breakfast, dinner, and dessert, and showed up in kitchens everywhere during the 30s through the 60s. You would stir corn into a simple batter, fry spoonfuls until puffed and crisp, and drizzle them with maple syrup or honey. It was sweet, salty, and comforting all at once. Families loved corn fritters for being easy to make, budget-friendly, and filling, especially when fresh or canned corn was plentiful. You would find recipes clipped from newspapers, tucked into church cookbooks, or scribbled on recipe cards, passed down through generations. During the Depression and wartime rationing, corn fritters helped stretch meals without much effort. Over time, ready-made breakfasts and frozen waffles replaced them, and these humble fritters faded from most tables. But for those who remember that crispy, syrupy bite, it was a little reminder of simple, satisfying comfort food. Date nut bread with cream cheese. Spread was the moist, sweet bread that filled lunchboxes, tea rooms, and bake sales from the 1940s through the 70s. You would mix chopped dates, walnuts, brown sugar, and bake it into a dense, flavorful loaf. Sliced thick and topped with tangy cream cheese, it became a popular treat for tea parties, school lunches, or afternoon snacks. You would spot the recipe in women's magazines, community cookbooks, or passed down through family traditions. Some versions added raisins or swapped walnuts for pecans, but the basics stayed the same: rich, nutty, and satisfying. It was one of those dependable bakes that made its way into every kitchen drawer, often scribbled on a faded recipe card. But as bakery shelves filled with pastries and fancier breads, this humble, quick bread quietly slipped away. For those who remember peeling back the wax paper, it was simple, homemade goodness. Egg salad on toast was one of those practical 10-minute meals that filled lunchboxes, fed tired workers, and showed up in every community cookbook for good reason. Leftover boiled eggs were never wasted. You chopped them up, mixed them with mayonnaise, maybe a little mustard if you were lucky, and piled it all onto a slice of toast. It sounds plain, but it got the job done. The eggs were filling, the toast made it portable, and you could whip it up in no time flat. This was not about fancy ingredients or gourmet flavors. It was the kind of recipe people leaned on when money was tight, time was short, and families still had to eat. You would see it at church luncheons, quick weekday dinners, or scribbled down on worn recipe cards tucked into kitchen drawers. It might be forgotten now, but egg salad on toast kept plenty of households going when they needed it most. Sardines on rye with onion and mustard was the kind of dinner that proved you could survive on pantry food and still eat something with bite. You opened a can of sardines, layered them cold onto slices of rye bread, and topped the whole thing with sliced onion and spicy mustard. That was dinner. It was salty, briny, sharp, and came together in minutes without a stove or oven in sight. This meal showed up in old cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards for one reason: it worked. Sardines were cheap, packed with protein, and lasted forever in the cupboard. Rye bread had enough bite to hold its own, and the mustard gave everything a sharp kick that kept it from feeling too plain. You ate it open-faced, with a fork and knife if you felt proper, or just with your hands when time was short. It was quick, practical, and oddly satisfying, even when the grocery budget was running on empty. Funny how the simplest pantry meals stuck with us, long after times got easier. A staple of potlucks and holiday gatherings, deviled egg redux breathes new life into a venerable classic. Early references to deviled eggs date back to ancient Rome, although the term deviled gained traction in 18th century Britain to describe spiced dishes. The modern spin often features tangy additions like Dijon mustard or a hint of vinegar, ensuring a zesty bite that balances the inherent creaminess of the yolk mixture. Culinary historians note that mayonnaise-based fillings became popular in the mid-1900s, appealing to a generation seeking straightforward, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Even home cooks pressed for time can whip them together in minutes. Simply boil, peel, halve, and blend. With minimal ingredients and easy assembly, these bite-sized treats perfectly combine speed and convenience. Their portability contributes to their enduring popularity, whether they appear at a casual brunch or a formal dinner. While the nostalgic factor remains strong, variations continue to emerge, showcasing unexpected garnishes like smoked paprika or crumbled bacon. Some folks joke that deviled eggs disappear faster than free donuts on a Monday morning, testifying to their irresistible charm. Cottage cheese and peach. Half plate was the kind of quick meal that felt just fancy enough to pass for lunch, even when the fridge was nearly empty. You opened a can of peach halves, plopped them on a plate, and added a big scoop of cottage cheese right in the center. That was it. 10 minutes, maybe less. It sounds odd now, but back then, this sweet and savory combo showed up at church teas, ladies' luncheons, and weekday meals when time and money were both running low. It was light, refreshing, and filled just enough of that hunger gap to get you through the afternoon. You could dress it up with a little sprinkle of nutmeg or a cherry on top if you were feeling fancy, but most kept it simple. It came from a time when canned fruit was a pantry staple, cottage cheese counted as protein, and families got creative to stretch every dollar. Another forgotten classic from the old cookbook that kept homes running smoothly. American chop suey with elbows and tomato sauce was how families made a one-pan dinner stretch across the whole table without breaking the bank. It started with ground beef browned in a skillet, elbow macaroni tossed right in, and a jar of tomato sauce poured over the top. Everything simmered together until the pasta was tender, the beef was cooked through, and the sauce thickened up. It took less than 10 minutes to pull together, and nobody left the table hungry. This meal came straight from the old cookbooks tucked away in kitchen drawers, the ones full of budget tricks and fast dinners for busy families. American chop suey was not fancy, but it was dependable, hot, and filling. The elbows caught just enough sauce, the beef added protein, and the whole thing fed a crowd without much effort. Families leaned on meals like this because they worked. They were fast, affordable, and made sure dinner still happened even when paychecks ran short. You could dress it up with a little cheese or keep it plain, but either way, it hit the spot. Funny how the simplest meals stick around the longest. Once a humble side dish favored in classic steakhouse settings, garlic butter mushrooms combined convenience with old-fashioned appeal. Across mid-century homes, mushrooms were praised for their distinctive earthiness and ability to soak up flavors, though some comedic observers quip that these little sponges find redemption in enough melted butter and garlic. Indeed, this swift recipe capitalizes on minimal ingredients, mushrooms, butter, garlic, and herbs, to create a robust union of savory undertones and tender texture. From stovetop to table, the entire process unfolds in minutes, making it a valuable option for busy families balancing packed schedules. Experts note that mushrooms, often referred to as nature's hidden gems, offer vitamins and minerals that complement balanced meals. For those prioritizing efficiency, there's no complicated technique involved. Simply saute and season, ensuring that flavor remains front and center. This straightforward approach underscores the accessibility of an ageless favorite. No advanced culinary training required. Mayo and peanut butter sandwiches with lettuce were one of those strange little meals that somehow showed up again and again in old cookbooks, no matter how odd they sounded. You spread peanut butter on one slice of soft white bread, mayonnaise on the other, tucked in a crisp piece of iceberg lettuce, and slapped the whole thing together. That was dinner. It sounds like a dare now, but back then it was quick, filling, and surprisingly popular when groceries ran low and people had to make the best of whatever was in the pantry. The peanut butter gave it richness, the mayo added tang, and the lettuce brought crunch to pull it all together. It was salty, creamy, a little sweet, and ready in under 5 minutes. Families leaned on meals like this because they stretched simple ingredients, filled you up, and kept dinner from feeling impossible when paychecks were short. It might not have been fancy, but it worked. And funny enough, folks who grew up with this odd little sandwich still remember the taste. Sometimes getting by meant getting creative. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were a quick, sweet little snack that kept plenty of kids going when there was not much else to pack in their lunchbox. You took a slice of sandwich bread, rolled it flat with a rolling pin or a glass, spread on jelly, and rolled it up tight. That was all there was to it. It sounds simple now, but back then, this was the kind of treat that showed up when families had to stretch every dollar. It was fast, easy, and made use of pantry staples that were always on hand. You would find these roll-ups tucked into school lunches, brought to church picnics, or passed around as after-school snacks when groceries were running low. The jelly added sweetness, the bread kept it filling, and it all came together in just a few minutes. It might be forgotten today, but for plenty of families, these jelly roll-ups were a quick fix that kept kids happy and parents sane. In many modern kitchens, time remains a precious commodity, but certain comforting dishes remind us that speed need not overshadow tradition. Instant egg drop soup fits this mold perfectly, bridging centuries-old techniques with modern convenience. Historically, egg drop soup features lightly whisked eggs stirred into steaming broth, forming delicate ribbons that float amidst savory flavors. Culinary records trace its roots back to Chinese cuisine, where efficiency and preparation blended seamlessly with nutritional balance. Restaurants popularized the dish in the United States throughout the 20th century, and home cooks embraced it for its swift assembly and gentle warmth. The texture stands out for its silky egg ribbons, complemented by subtle onion or scallion notes, culminating in a delightfully simple bowl. The entire process, from boiling water to swirling eggs, can be completed in under 10 minutes, ensuring that families with hectic schedules find a hearty remedy for weeknight dinners. Versatility emerges as well, as one can season it with ginger, soy sauce, or even leftover vegetables. It's a testament to how minimal ingredients can yield maximum comfort. On sweltering summer days, a crisp and refreshing side wins hearts with minimal fuss. Thinly sliced cucumbers tossed in a tangy dressing highlight how speed and convenience can merge seamlessly with satisfying taste. Historians trace cucumber cultivation back over 3,000 years, with evidence in ancient India, though the tradition of quickly pickling them for salads gained traction much later. Food enthusiasts joke that this dish is the best way to turn a watery green vegetable into a bona fide star at potlucks. Each bite offers a cool snap balanced by a delicate vinegar kick, creating a pleasing contrast in both flavor and texture. The process remains remarkably straightforward. Slice, season, stir, and serve. This simplicity and accessibility make it appealing for busy households, ensuring that even novice cooks can achieve a crowd-pleasing result. Some add onions, others incorporate dill or a pinch of sugar for extra zest, reflecting how flexible this old favorite can be. Indeed, cucumbers contain a high water content, which supports hydration, practical for those warm months when thirst quenching is essential. Grape jelly meatball skillet might sound like a strange mix now, but back then, it was one of those quirky, sweet, and savory meals that showed up fast and stretched what little meat you had. You browned some mini meatballs in a skillet, poured in grape jelly and a splash of mustard, and let it all bubble together. In 10 minutes flat, dinner was ready. It was sweet, tangy, salty, and surprisingly filling. Families leaned on recipes like this because they turned a small amount of ground beef into a meal that felt bigger than it was. You could find this in old church cookbooks, clipped from women's magazines, or scribbled onto recipe cards tucked in drawers. It was not about fancy ingredients. It was about getting something warm, satisfying, and a little fun onto the table, fast. Today it feels forgotten, but back then, this sweet skillet meal kept homes running during the toughest weeks. Canned chicken hash was how you made a hot, filling dinner happen when all you had was pantry scraps and a few minutes to spare. You popped open a can of shredded chicken, fried it in a skillet with some chopped onions, and tossed in leftover mashed potatoes or canned potatoes if you had them. Everything crisped up around the edges, browned in the pan, and came together into something that looked decent and filled your stomach fast. Old cookbooks leaned hard on meals like this because they were cheap, quick, and made sure nothing went to waste. Chicken hash might not sound glamorous, but in homes where leftovers were gold, it was a lifesaver. You could top it with a fried egg or spoon a little gravy over it if you were lucky, but most folks ate it just as it was, hot, salty, and good enough to count. This was dinner that made the best of what you had, and back in those days, that meant everything. Funny how meals like this stuck around even when fancier options showed up. Sometimes the fast, familiar ones were the best. Garlic-scented, spicy, and elegantly minimal, this Italian treasure draws hungry fans with its impressive simplicity. 10-minute pasta aglio e olio soared in popularity thanks to its swift cooking time, making it ideal for busy households yearning for full-bodied flavor. Historians trace its roots to Naples, where garlic, oil, and chili flakes found their way into countless frugal suppers, proving that even minimal ingredients can create culinary magic. Enthusiasts often joke that this one-pot wonder is proof you don't need a full Italian culinary degree to impress guests, though precision in cooking pasta al dente remains key. Simplicity and accessibility shine through as garlic-infused olive oil blankets each strand, introducing a subtle heat that blends beautifully with the starchy richness. Nostalgia lingers because generations have embraced it as an homage to rustic Italian peasant cooking, where fancy sauces take a back seat to wholesome foundations. For those keeping an eye on speed, a 10-minute cook time makes this enticing for weeknight dinners, unexpected guests, or even late-night cravings. Salmon and canned pea toasts were how you made pantry food look halfway fancy when the clock and your energy ran out. You took canned salmon, mashed it with mayonnaise, stirred in some peas, and spread it thick over hot toast. That was dinner. It sounds simple now, but when fresh meat was scarce or paychecks were tight, this was the kind of meal that kept families going. The old cookbooks were filled with little tricks like this, ways to stretch canned goods into something that almost felt special. Salmon from a can never fooled anyone, but the crunch of toast and the soft peas made it oddly satisfying. You might even see a sprinkle of pepper or a squeeze of lemon if someone was feeling bold. It came together fast, filled you up, and for those 10 minutes in the kitchen, it made you feel like you still had control over dinner. Sometimes that is all anyone needed. Saltine cracker stackers were the kind of quick, sweet snack that kept busy families going when there was not much else to work with. You grabbed some saltine crackers, spread on peanut butter, added banana slices, and drizzled honey over the top if you had it. 10 minutes, maybe less, and you had a snack that stuck to your ribs. This little recipe was everywhere back then, passed around in school lunchrooms, scribbled into community cookbooks, and tucked away in kitchen drawers for emergencies. It sounds simple now, but in a time when grocery budgets were tight and sweet treats were a luxury, saltine cracker stackers filled the gap. They gave kids energy, kept parents sane, and showed just how creative families could be with a box of crackers and a few pantry staples. It might seem forgotten today, but for plenty of households back then, this quick little snack was a lifesaver. Creamed corn and hot dog skillet was one of those meals that showed up when time was short and the cupboards looked bare. You sliced up those hot dogs, tossed them in a skillet, and let them simmer in a can of creamed corn until everything bubbled together. It sounds a little ridiculous now, but back then, it was comfort food at its most practical. This was not a recipe out of some fancy magazine. It came straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that every kitchen drawer seemed to have. Families on tight budgets loved it because it made use of pantry staples, and somehow, that sweet corn and salty hot dog combination worked. You could dress it up with black pepper or a little hot sauce, but most folks kept it plain. After a long day, this dinner showed up in 10 minutes flat, filling your belly even if your wallet felt empty. Funny how those quick meals stick with you long after the hard times pass. Crisp bacon, juicy tomatoes, and crunchy lettuce layered between slices of toasted bread might seem ordinary, yet they form a timeless favorite that transcends culinary fads. Often referred to as the old-fashioned BLT, this sandwich exemplifies the essence of speed and convenience, delivering a hearty meal with minimal preparation time. Culinary historians trace its lineage to early 20th century American diners, where bacon, lettuce, and tomato combined to create a balanced combination of savory, fresh, and tangy flavors. Some enthusiasts humorously claim that BLT stands for Better Lunch Triumph, reflecting its universal appeal and simple construction. Though easy to assemble, this sandwich boasts complex layers of taste and texture. The smoky crispness of bacon, paired with refreshing lettuce and the natural sweetness of a vine-ripened tomato, culminates in a harmonious bite that satisfies almost any midday craving. Nostalgia emerges each time it appears on a plate, as countless childhood memories revolve around that first crunchy mouthful. Its accessibility means that even cooks with limited time or confidence can excel at preparing this familiar treat. Tomato soup with cracker crumble was the ultimate quick fix when groceries were low and appetites were high. You heated up a can of tomato soup, crushed some saltines over the top, and called it a meal. It sounds basic, but it hit the spot. Grandma's cookbook was full of these quick, practical recipes that stretched every last pantry staple, and this one was no exception. The saltines soaked up the soup, adding just enough crunch and thickness to make it filling. Parents loved it because it cost next to nothing and came together in 10 minutes flat. Kids loved it because it was warm, salty, and familiar. You could always dress it up with a sprinkle of cheese or some pepper, but most families kept it plain and simple. It was the kind of meal you would find after school, in chilly weather, or on those nights when there just was not time for anything else. Fast, affordable, and quietly forgotten, like so many of the recipes tucked into the back pages of Grandma's old cookbook. Fried canned spaghetti and cheese was the dinner you threw together when there was not much left in the fridge and your stomach was growling. You would open up a can of leftover spaghetti, sauce and all, and toss it straight into a hot skillet. As it fried, the sauce thickened, the noodles crisped up around the edges, and everything smelled just good enough to pass for a proper meal. Then you sprinkled shredded cheese over the top, let it melt, and scraped it onto a plate. That was dinner. It came from old cookbooks full of clever ways to stretch leftovers and make canned food feel less like survival and more like comfort. It was salty, cheesy, crispy in the right places, and ready in under 10 minutes. Most folks ate it standing by the stove or while leaning over the kitchen table because that is how those quick meals always went. It was simple, but it filled you up. Funny how a can of spaghetti and some cheese could turn into something worth remembering. In culinary circles, shrimp scampi often conjures images of sophisticated restaurants, yet it can be crafted in a flash at home without fuss. Earning the moniker Speedy, this streamlined version harnesses fresh shrimp, garlic, butter, and lemon to produce a dazzling entree in mere minutes. Historical records indicate that the term scampi originally referred to small lobsters known as langoustines in Italy, but American cooks embraced shrimp for a more accessible twist on the classic approach. Even minimalists find it gratifying. A swift sauté brings out succulent textures while blending buttery richness with citrus tang. Devotees consider it an ideal solution when time is scarce, but flavor must shine. Some playfully note that it keeps dinner guests from scuttling off early, thanks to its irresistible aroma. Indeed, experts praise shrimp as a great source of lean protein, and with modern supply chains, it remains widely available. Because ingredients are straightforward and easy to obtain, this recipe demonstrates that culinary elegance doesn't require intricate steps or hours of work. Served over pasta or alongside crusty bread, the warm, garlicky sauce appeals to both connoisseurs and casual diners. During mid-century potlucks, families often relied on pantry staples to whip up vibrant dishes at a moment's notice. This colorful medley typically combined different canned beans, chopped onions, and a simple vinaigrette, celebrating speed and convenience above all else. Culinary historians credit post-war marketing campaigns with popularizing the humble bean mix, as home cooks saw it as a thrifty and reliable way to feed guests quickly. The sweet and sour tang, balanced by the satisfying texture of tender beans, continues to evoke nostalgia for summertime picnics and cheerful backyard gatherings. Many laud its simplicity and accessibility, noting that nothing more than a can opener and a basic chopping board is required. Some households toss in bell peppers or celery for crunch, while others prefer a sprinkling of herbs to add brightness. Flavor and texture remain paramount. Each bite merges the mild creaminess of beans with the zesty snap of onions and vinegar. A few comedic fans joke that bean salad is the ultimate test of group etiquette. There's always that one person who can't resist more helpings, and they're not shy about it. Fried Bologna and mustard sandwich was a 10-minute fix that never pretended to be fancy, but always hit the spot. You tossed a slice of bologna into a hot pan, let it sizzle until the edges curled, slapped it onto soft bread, and added mustard. That was it. Simple, quick, and surprisingly satisfying. Back in Grandma's day, this showed up when money was tight, groceries were low, or you just needed something fast before heading back to work or school. It was salty, smoky, and the bologna crisped up just enough to feel like real cooking. Kids loved it, adults leaned on it, and every household had their own little spin on the recipe. Some added cheese, some toasted the bread, but most kept it plain and practical. You would not find this in glossy magazines, but you would find it tucked in those old handwritten cookbooks, passed down from one generation to the next. Another quick forgotten gem from a time when meals had to be fast, filling, and affordable. Campbell's mushroom soup over toast was one of those forgotten Depression-era dinners that somehow made a quiet comeback in old cookbooks from the 1940s through the 70s. It was as simple as it sounds, but it filled your belly fast. You opened a can of creamy mushroom soup, heated it up in a pot, and spooned it over slices of buttered toast. That was dinner. It did not pretend to be anything fancy, but when the cupboards were almost empty and the clock was ticking, it got the job done. Families leaned on meals like this when money was tight and time was short. It turned one can of soup into a warm, filling meal that stretched across the table. Maybe you sprinkled some black pepper on top, maybe a little dried parsley, but most folks kept it plain. It soaked into the bread, made the whole kitchen smell like home, and filled you up after a long day. Those old cookbooks were full of meals like this, simple recipes that felt comforting without much effort. Funny how the humblest dinners tend to stick around the longest, even when everything else changes. In countless family kitchens, Speedy rice pilaf stands as a testament to how resourcefulness can satisfy palates in minutes. Historically, pilaf traces back centuries to Middle Eastern and Central Asian cuisines, though it found renewed popularity across the United States as packaged convenience foods gained momentum in the 20th century. Some comedic observers say it's a dish that never retires, showcasing staying power in households across the country. At its core, this recipe relies on briefly sautéing onions in a dash of oil, then combining quick-cooking rice with flavorful spices, ensuring a well-rounded taste without prolonged stovetop watch. The resulting texture is fluffy yet distinct, offering a balance of softness and gentle bite that appeals to all ages. Nostalgia emerges when recalling mid-century TV commercials that championed instant rice, promising a perfect side dish ready faster than a station break. Today, home cooks still appreciate its no-fuss approach, which requires only basic ingredients and minimal monitoring. The convenience resonates with those juggling, busy schedules, who often joke that any dish requiring more than 10 minutes conflicts with precious downtime. Baked bean toasties were the kind of quick, hearty meal you could throw together with just a few ingredients and still feel like you had something warm and filling on the table. You toasted up some sandwich bread, heated a can of baked beans, and spooned them over the top with a sprinkle of shredded cheddar if you had it. It sounds basic, but when you were short on groceries and stretched for time, this meal worked wonders. The beans were filling, the toast added crunch, and the cheese made it all feel a little more special. You would see this simple meal show up in New England kitchens, packed into lunchboxes, or scribbled into old cookbooks full of fast, affordable recipes. It was not about being fancy, it was about getting something hot and satisfying on the table in under 10 minutes. Today, people might forget how handy meals like this were, but back then, baked bean toasties filled a lot of hungry bellies without breaking the bank. Pimento cheese sandwich melts were one of those quick, bold dinners that came straight from old cookbooks packed with practical, no-nonsense recipes. You took slices of bread, spread them thick with creamy, tangy pimento cheese, and grilled them in a skillet until the outside was golden and crisp. It was not just a sandwich. It was a fast, hot meal with big flavor that came together in 10 minutes or less. Pimento cheese was everywhere back then, especially in southern kitchens, but families all over used it to stretch groceries and add some punch to an otherwise plain dinner. You could eat the melt with pickles on the side or a handful of chips if you had them, but most folks kept it simple. The creamy cheese, the sharp bite of pimentos, the crunchy bread, it all worked together to make a dinner that felt filling without taking much effort. These meals showed up again and again in faded cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because they did exactly what they needed to: feed everyone fast. Funny how the boldest flavors came from the simplest tricks. Which recipe would you bring back? Tell us below, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten favorites.